Religious leaders won't admit this, but everything we've learned about history demands we ask some questions. What if Eden wasn't a garden on Earth, but a world that people once called home? What if the first paradise wasn't here, but out there, on a planet we lost so completely that our ancestors turned the memory into myth? And what if the reason we left wasn't because of sin, or temptation, or divine punishment, but because Eden itself died, or collapsed, or pushed us out? And now we're going to follow the trail nobody wants to talk about, a trail that starts with scripture, crosses into science, and ends on a cold red desert that may have once been the original cradle of humanity. Because Mars wasn't always dead. That part isn't a conspiracy. Scientists agree Mars once had a dense atmosphere, global oceans, rivers that carved valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon. And it was warm enough to support life. The official theories say it all vanished billions of years ago. But that timeline keeps shifting. Every few years, NASA quietly edits the story. First, Mars lost water 4 billion years ago. Then 3 billion. Then 1.5 billion. And now some data shows liquid water might have existed only hundreds of millions of years ago. That's suspiciously recent. Suspicious enough to match with something else. Every ancient civilization on Earth says humanity came from somewhere else. The Sumerians said we descended from the sky. The Dogon said their gods came from the stars. Early Jewish mysticism described Eden as a place not of this world. Gnostic texts describe humanity as exiles trapped in a physical reality we didn't originate from. These aren't random coincidences. These are memories, distorted memories of a world before this one. If Mars was Eden, something catastrophic must have happened. Something that kicked us out, or forced us to flee, or made the planet unlivable in a violent, rapid collapse. And when you look at Mars with that lens, a lot of things that never added up begin making sense. Take the atmosphere. The official story is that solar winds stripped it away. But NASA's own MAVEN spacecraft found the atmospheric loss happened extremely fast. Faster than their models predicted. Not slow erosion, a sudden drop. Almost like a shockwave blew Mars apart. Scientists found xenon-129, a radioactive isotope scattered across the surface. On Earth, xenon-129 is found after nuclear detonations. Dr. John Brandenburg, a plasma physicist, wrote that Mars shows signatures of 2 massive nuclear blasts in its distant past. Of course, the moment he published it, he was mocked, attacked, dismissed. But his math checked out, his data checked out. It still does. And nobody has successfully disproved it. They just laughed and moved on. That's not a refutation, that's fear. If Mars was Eden, the possibility that we, or something before us, destroyed it isn't just storytelling. It's a scientific theory. Maybe humanity reached a level of technology there that we no longer remember. Maybe a war broke out. Maybe a catastrophic energy experiment destabilized the atmosphere. Maybe the gods of ancient myth weren't supernatural beings at all, but the remnants of advanced survivors struggling to control a dying world. And maybe the fall of man wasn't moral failure, but technological failure. A civilization that gained knowledge faster than wisdom and paid the ultimate price. But that's only one angle. Because the story of Eden also describes a place of restriction, a place with rules, a place where knowledge was forbidden, a place guarded by entities with weapons of fire. That doesn't sound like a peaceful garden. That sounds like containment. The serpent wasn't tempting humanity into sin. It was tempting humanity into awareness, into understanding something about their situation that they weren't supposed to know. If Eden was a controlled environment, a biolab, a biodome, a testing ground, or something far more ancient, then the expulsion wasn't a punishment. It was an escape, or a malfunction, or the loss of containment. Imagine a world where humanity was created, engineered, or modified for a purpose. The Sumerians explicitly said the Anunnaki created us because they needed workers. The Gnostics said humanity was trapped in a world built by a lesser creator, a demiurge, who feared that if humanity gained knowledge, we would surpass him. In Genesis, when Adam and Eve gain knowledge, God reacts with fear. Behold, the man has become like one of us. One of us. Plural. Who is us? And why would a divine being fear humanity becoming like them unless there was something to lose? Unless humanity wasn't supposed to evolve past a certain point? If Eden was a restricted world, a prison, a farm, a lab, a colony, then the expulsion might have been the first act of human rebellion. We gained something we weren't meant to gain. We broke containment. We escaped, and the only place we could flee to was Earth. But then there's the third possibility, the tragic one. The one nobody wants to consider because it hits too close to home. What if Eden didn't reject us because of morality, or control, or rebellion? What if Eden rejected us because it died? Because the planet itself collapsed? Because the environment we were built for, or born into, became lethal? Mars is covered in dust storms that can engulf the entire planet. Imagine those storms at their worst. Imagine a magnetic field collapsing, letting radiation pour in. Imagine oceans boiling off. Imagine food sources disappearing. Imagine civilizations watching their world fail day by day. That kind of trauma doesn't just vanish. It echoes through myth. It echoes through religion. It echoes through the human psyche. Eden wasn't a paradise. It was a memory of something we lost. Something that crumbled beneath us. Something that pushed us away not because it hated us, but because it couldn't sustain us anymore. In this angle, the expulsion wasn't punishment. It was evacuation. And that's the most chilling possibility of all. Because if Eden died, and if Mars was Eden, then humanity has already survived one planetary extinction. And if we've forgotten that once, we could be forgetting it again. Think about this. Ancient cultures all over the world have flood myths, nearly identical stories, massive destruction, survivors fleeing in boats, arks, or sky vessels, gods abandoning them, worlds ending. But what if the flood wasn't water? What if the flood was radiation, or dust, or fire, or atmospheric collapse? What if the symbolism is all that survived the trauma? What if our ancestors described the end of Mars using the only language they had left, metaphor and myth? Now look at the Garden of Eden again with Mars in mind. A place where humanity lived in harmony with the world. A place where we didn't have to toil or labor. A place where everything was provided. Mars, with its oceans, rivers, and thick atmosphere, could have been lush long before Earth stabilized. And then, after the collapse, our ancestors found themselves on a raw, dangerous, unfamiliar new world. Earth, where survival required effort and suffering. Cursed is the ground because of you. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food. That line doesn't sound like a punishment. It sounds like adaptation. It sounds like immigrants arriving on a harsher world. When ancient texts describe cherubim guarding the way back to Eden, that could be the simplest metaphor of all. Cherubim weren't cute angels. They were described as monstrous beings of fire and motion, guardians of thresholds, weapons of light. The flaming sword might not be a sword at all. It might be radiation, or atmospheric firestorms, or the burning surface of a world that cannot sustain life. The path back to Eden was blocked not by divine decree, but by the laws of physics. Now let's go deeper. If humanity came from Mars, then the transition to Earth would have been traumatic in ways we don't fully grasp. Gravity alone would change biology. Mars has lower gravity, So humans born there would be taller, thinner, more fragile. On Earth, they would struggle. Bones would ache. Hearts would strain. Breathing would be harder. This could explain why early humans lived shorter lives and suffered. It also explains myths of early humans being giants or demigods. They weren't supernatural. They were immigrants from a low-gravity world. Skin tone becomes a clue too. Mars lacks a magnetic field. Radiation exposure would alter pigmentation, cause mutations, and select for different traits. When humans arrived on Earth, a world with strong magnetic protection and thick atmosphere, skin tones diversified rapidly. That doesn't disprove evolution, it complements it. Now think about the sudden appearance of advanced agriculture, writing, metallurgy, and astronomy in Sumer, seemingly overnight. Mainstream historians call it the Sumerian miracle, a sudden explosion of civilization. But what if the miracle wasn't sudden at all? What if it was memory? What if some of the first humans on Earth remembered fragments of Martian knowledge, irrigation, construction, mathematics, celestial navigation, and rebuilt what they could with the resources available? Now look at the timeline. Homo sapiens as we know them appear suddenly with advanced cognition. Geneticists discovered a bottleneck event where humanity nearly went extinct, and only a small population survived. That could be a migration from Mars after a planetary collapse. Earth would have seemed like paradise compared to a dying world, even if it was dangerous. We were starting over with almost nothing. Here's where the conspiracy deepens. Every time NASA finds something that hints Mars once hosted life, or something more complex, the evidence gets buried. The Viking landers in 1976 ran tests for life. One of them came back positive, and NASA dismissed it because it didn't match expectations. They didn't rerun the test. They didn't follow up. They just declared it a false positive and moved on. That's not science. That's narrative control. Then there's the Cydonia face, the giant structure that looks like a humanoid face staring at the sky. When the first image came out in 1976, the public exploded with interest. NASA promised higher resolution images. When the higher res images finally came out decades later, they looked suspicious, over-sharpened, poorly lit, missing expected shadows. Many imaging experts said the photos looked altered or composited. NASA shrugged. Case closed. Move along. Then there are the vanished files, early Mars mission data that cannot be located, hard drives that failed, telemetry that was lost. Even the original high-resolution Apollo moon landing tapes were overwritten accidentally. Accidentally. Overwritten. Billions of dollars worth of data gone. Not stored, not backed up, not protected. As if someone didn't want certain records to survive. Then there's the biggest anomaly of all, the magnetic map of Mars. There is a massive magnetic anomaly near the equator, shaped eerily like a valley, a basin, a cradle. Some scientists call it a remnant of ancient tectonics. Others call it something else, a cradle, a garden, a region shielded from radiation long after the rest of Mars became barren, a final refuge. Was this the true Eden? A protected zone where early humanity lived before the collapse? A last green world in a dying planet? If this was Eden, the story of expulsion becomes something much deeper. We didn't get kicked out of paradise. We got forced out by planetary death. Our ancestors saw the skies change, the storms intensify, the radiation rise. They saw oceans evaporate and winds strip the land. They saw their home crumble. They fled. They survived. And when they told the story, generations later, the details became poetry, myth, religious allegory. Because how do you explain to a child that your world was destroyed? How do you tell them that the gods didn't punish you? The planet did? You turned trauma into story, into moral lesson, into symbol. And so Eden became a garden with a serpent, a garden with rules, a garden with knowledge, a garden protected by beings of fire. And when humanity was forced to leave, They called it punishment because the alternative, that the world itself died, was too painful to face. But here's the twist. What if all three theories are true at once? What if humanity did something catastrophic on Mars? Something that destabilized the atmosphere and led to collapse? What if the elites or rulers or gods of that world controlled knowledge to prevent rebellion? What if the serpent represented awakening or science or forbidden technology? And what if, after the catastrophe, the survivors interpreted the disaster as divine judgment, even if it wasn't? This is how myth is born. This is how memory becomes sacred text. And now for the darkest question of all. If we once destroyed a planet, are we doing it again? Look at Earth. Rising temperatures, disappearing species, collapsing ecosystems, toxic oceans, radiation increases, magnetic field weakening, social instability, technological power in the hands of people who don't have wisdom. If human beings have forgotten what happened once, it's possible we're repeating the same cycle without realizing it. What if Earth is our second Eden? What if this planet is the second chance Mars never had? And what if the story of the fall wasn't a warning about morality, but a warning about survival? A warning about knowledge without discipline, power without responsibility, technology without wisdom. If Mars was Eden, the real danger isn't discovering that truth. It's ignoring it. And here's the final revelation. Ancient texts say humanity will one day attempt to return to Eden, to go back to the place we were expelled from, to reclaim what was lost. And what are we doing right now? Spending billions to reach Mars, preparing colonies, sending probes, digging into soil, searching for water, trying to terraform, trying to bring Eden back. Why? Why Mars? Why not Titan? Why not Europa? Why not other moons? Why are we obsessed with Mars? Because instinct is older than memory. And every time we look at the sky, we're remembering something we lost. Something we dimly feel in our bones. Something that whispers in our DNA. Something waiting for us on a silent red world. A message. A ruin. A secret. A truth buried in the cold, dry dust. The truth that Eden wasn't a myth. It was home. And we've been trying to go back ever since.